Hello, my name is Christina Andre with Raymond's marketing team. I'm here today with Paul Kennedy, who is a senior manager who assists in cybersecurity consulting services here at Raymond. Today, we are very excited to talk about the cybersecurity performance goals that were just released from CISA. Now, Paul, can you just give us a quick overview on this for anybody who's unaware of these?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll help define both those things you just mentioned. So CISA is the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency within the federal government. They've had historically a lot of different things they oversee, including helping our federal agencies with cybersecurity. And they've taken on an increased role with helping the general public actually implement and determine the right security for those organizations outside of the federal government. So initiatives they've started implementing are things like the CPGs, the cross-sector cybersecurity performance goals that they recently released in October. So basically, CISA has taken the existing standard that was put out by NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, who puts out a number of standards related to cybersecurity. And their main one, it's kind of their entry level or kind of broadest scope, is the cybersecurity framework. And so CISA took NIST's cybersecurity framework and said, hey, amongst this, even though this is a simpler framework than many of the others that NIST release, it still can be quite challenging for organizations to know where to start. And so they boiled down that list to a smaller subset of the things that they consider the most key to start with. They're very clear in saying, hey, if you implement the CPGs, which are a great foundation, that's not a complete program, but it's a great place to start, because one of the most challenging things that organizations I talk to are dealing with is not knowing where to start. It can be quite intimidating, quite confusing. There's so much it feels like you have to tackle. And so these are a great place to do that. So.
Thank you, Paul. Now I know you said there's a pretty extensive list of these. Is there any specific ones that should be maybe called out more, that something that it's an easy place to start for people who are looking at these?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, let me go back a second here. As we think about building the cybersecurity program, right? These things that are I think there's about 40 in there. These CPGs are a list and a subset of an overall cybersecurity program. As I said, they're a great place to start, but it's very key that you build out a larger program that's going to oversee your cybersecurity environment and the risks that you need to be addressing to make sure that you're right sizing the controls that you're putting in place. We can absolutely help on things like that with a program that we have, a service offering we have called CyberReady, where we do a lot of these same things. We've been seeing the same challenge from organizations that we help. And so similar to what CISA's put out, we've been helping clients simplify that process of actually implementing a cybersecurity program to manage their risk. Amongst the things that CPG put out, there's a handful I think that are out there that are interesting that I think most organizations that I see probably aren't doing, or might be surprised to even see on here. They might not even be thinking about these types of things. A lot of the historical information that folks have relied on, or different leaders have relied on to build their, to secure their environment, that all quickly changes. So as we think about that, one of the first ones, the easiest one to talk about is passwords. Everyone is used to dealing with passwords these days. I look forward to the future of passwordless login and authentication of accessing systems. And I think that's something that is very achievable in the not too distant future. But while we still have them, the CISA CPGs say that, hey, you really should be using passwords with length more than complexity. So they stress that it's important to have passwords that are 15 plus characters in length, especially where you don't have multi-factor authentication in place. I think everyone's been talking about multi-factor authentication or MFA or 2FA, or you might see a couple different names for it. You're probably used to dealing with that in your banking systems, if not other places. It's pretty standard these days. But where you don't have that MFA, especially where you don't have that MFA, making sure you have very long passwords that make it difficult for an attacker to guess what your password is. And people find it easier to remember passwords that are long versus passwords that are complex. So, and that length increases significantly the amount of time it will take an attacker to break your password. Some other things related to passwords they recommend are things like password managers. Password managers, we've historically always said, don't write down your password. Well, now we're saying, no, do write down your password, but write it down someplace that's secure. The reality is, I think I saw a stat that, the average person these days has several hundred passwords. So of course you're not going to be able to remember those. And every one of those passwords should be different from the others. The solution to that is something like a password manager. There's a lot of great products out there. You'll need to do some research on them, but happy to have a conversation about what we use if anyone wants to talk about it. Those password managers not only can store those passwords so that you don't have to remember them, they can help you generate long, complex ones so that now that you're not relying on your memory, the system can autofill those passwords for you from an actual password manager that's not stored in your internet browser or something like that might be subject to attack. The other thing that they say is, make sure companies should make sure they're logging and monitoring invalid login attempts. You should be able to see when someone is trying to access a system with a password that's not correct, so that you can check, hey, is this an actual user that's doing this, or is this some attacker that's trying to brute force their way in or throw a bunch of passwords at the system to see if they're able to actually authenticate. So even on a simple thing like passwords, some very interesting things in there. Some others recommendations they have are things like what they call baselining, making sure you've captured what the expected, systems like servers and databases, the versions of those systems and applications that are in place, as well as the key configurations that actually drive what you're doing. So if you think about a tool that most people are probably familiar with, something like antivirus, detects and stops, viruses that get onto your computer from actually spreading and taking over your system, encrypting your files, things like that. So the key configuration that drives that is something like, hey, is it set to be looking at the activity that's actually occurring as files are opened and loaded? Is it set to actually scan the full system on a daily, weekly basis to detect if there's anything that's not actively working but might be sitting on the system? Those things are settings within the system or configuration, and you want to be capturing those types of configurations for your security tools, for your applications, for your whole environment, certainly for those things that are most critical, so that when something goes wrong, you are more quickly able to bring those systems and infrastructure back online. And then also you're able to detect when some of those key configurations have been changed inappropriately. Third one I talk about is SIEM or SIEM, or essentially centralized monitoring and logging of your system's activity. Most organizations these days have all sorts of different applications and systems and servers and networking tools and infrastructure and security tools, and I could keep going on and on and on. Point being, all these different things are spitting out logs of activity that's occurring. And those things can be very key for detecting whether or not there's an attacker in your environment. The sooner you can detect and stop an attack within your environment, the less damage they can do. So it's important to be able to see that activity and analyze it. And tools like SIEM or SIEM, and there's lots of different debates about how to say it, are ways to pull that information in one place. Oftentimes can automate a lot of the analysis of those logs and alert a person when, hey, this is something that needs some attention. Those are the first three. I promise I don't have more than three more, but these are a handful or a couple of the great recommendations that are out there. And some other things that some of these are, one of these, the next one's a little bit more amusing to me. They actually put in the cybersecurity performance goals to go have a pizza party. It's a little funny. Like, why would you be saying go have a pizza party? They said it specifically in the context of building relationships between different departments. As you look at a lot of organizations that have what you call the typical IT, the applications that might run your accounting and finance, or the websites, the things like that you think of from a typical tool perspective. And then you have another area that's gotten a lot less attention but needs attention, which is called OT, or operational technology. As you think about manufacturing environments or industrial control systems, places that have a lot of machines that need to run semi-autonomously on their own, those tools are still subject, they're still computers. They're oftentimes not managed by IT departments, so don't get that same attention from a cybersecurity perspective, but they still need to be secured. And so the CPGs bring it up in the context of, hey, build relationships between your IT and your OT if you have it. And I think it's actually something that's good to think about for the rest of the organization as well. One of the biggest things that I see in clients that I work with consistently, just about every organization I've talked to, is that there's some sort of disconnect between the IT departments and the business departments, whether that's strategy in terms of what needs to be secured, visibility of something that's being used by a department that's not supported directly by IT because it's some sort of web-based application. Those types of things still need to be secured. And so having those relationships between those who are responsible for security within the environment and the rest of the business can help foster a more productive and effective cybersecurity program, because you actually have those conversations about, hey, what are you guys using? What needs to be secured? What matters to you from in line with your business objectives and strategy? And not having those relationships really leads to kind of ineffective or inefficient processes where you might not be protecting the right things. One other one that I do very consistently see in organizations is third parties and third-party risk. This is a fun one. I say that quite sarcastically because this is an area where everyone these days deals with all sorts of third parties. Whether it's your bank that you're working with, or someone that you've bought some sort of product from in order to be able to deliver your business operations. Probably most organizations, even small ones, might have tens or hundreds of third parties they work with. Those third parties bring risk to your business still. There's very good reasons that you work with them. They're probably specialized in something that you want their access, their specialization, or their tool or their system. But when you've engaged with them, whether they have access into your environment or you're taking your systems and your processes and your operations or your data and putting it in a third-party system, you've now lost control to some extent of that process, operation, or data. And so you haven't lost the risk. If that data disappears or that system shuts down, is no longer accessible, you still have the risk that you might not be able to do what your business does best on a day-to-day basis because you're relying on them, but you don't have that control to actually secure yourself. So it's important to understand what the third parties that you're working with are doing to secure themselves and therefore secure you, because that's where attackers are going to try and compromise us, is with those relationships with those other external organizations. Finally, the last point I'll touch on is they recommend third-party monitoring of your cybersecurity environment. So, I talk about this in the context of incident response plans very often. You can have a plan, you can have an incident response plan, you can have a strategy for building your cybersecurity program. But until you've actually tested that those processes are working the way you expect them to, that plan is just a piece of paper. You can have all sorts of flashy tools, but if you haven't actually validated that those tools are working the way you expect them to, and that they're actually doing what you want them to secure your environment, then you don't know that you're actually as secure as you expect. And so a very key way to do that is to bring in an independent set of eyes and use some sort of third party to validate the way that you're actually securing your environment. And organizations like Raymond can help you do that. So we've talked about 6, a little over a handful suggestions out of the list they have. It's a great list. Actually, it's very understandable and digestible. I definitely recommend going and looking it up. It's very easy to find. You can go to CISA.gov/CPG, or just search CISA CPG, CISA CPG, and you'll find it pretty quickly. It's a pretty quick document, not a ton of content in there, and very understandable. But remember, it's a subset of everything that you should be doing. So as you're thinking about where to go from here and how to improve your security, take a step back and think about bringing in folks that are doing this on a day-to-day basis, helping organizations like yours build a cybersecurity strategy that it can help you actually secure your environment the right way, not spending too much, having the right resources in the right places. And we can help you do that through our product like CyberReady. So please don't hesitate to reach out. Happy to help however we can.
Thank you, Paul. This was a very great empowered chat today. Like Paul said, feel free to reach out if you need any help with your cybersecurity. There will also be links in the article below. Thank you, and everyone have a great day.